Alright, so we were talking about computer science and other disciplines, non-drawing stuff with turtles examples. And we saw some cool stuff in social science, art, virtual reality. And then, of course, there's a lot of applications to computer science, in medicine, in just like hard sciences. Like you're going to go explore stuff that can't really work with a human just yet. We can't send a human to Mars very easily, but we can send a little robot and we can program it to do cool stuff for us. That's pretty nice. So the last hot topic area that we have not really covered is finance. So let's talk about cryptocurrency. We have to, I guess. It's important. It is, I guess, not as popular anymore, but oh man, was everybody crazy about it a few years ago. So I'm going to talk about Bitcoin for this little set of lecture, but it should apply to a lot of different kinds of cryptocurrency. Maybe we all, I don't know, do we own Bitcoin, any of us? So that's pretty fun to think about. It's the most popular one. If you own a different one, a lot of them function in this way. So yeah, we're going to talk about Bitcoin, and I'm going to talk about it at a very high level. We'll talk about cryptography and how it applies, though, so we're going there too, but there's a lot deeper to the rabbit hole than we're going to cover today. So just first of all, what in the world is a cryptocurrency if we've not really paid attention to this stuff? And honestly, you're probably better off if you haven't. A cryptocurrency is just a kind of money that does not exist in physical form. So it's completely electronic. You're sending just data to somebody, and that functions as money. So it uses encryption, the powers of encryption that we've been talking about, to make sure that you don't, nobody's stealing your money, first of all, and then also to make it so that nobody really knows which account is yours, which is kind of cool to think about too. But everybody has an account, and Bitcoin, the most popular cryptocurrency, was created back in 2009, so it's pretty old by now. And it was made up, somebody posted a research paper about it, and they called themselves Satoshi Nakamoto, but this is apparently not the person's real name who invented Bitcoin. It's a pseudonym, so who knows who the real person was. And so yeah, because of all the cryptography involved, and the fact that nobody's putting their name anywhere, cryptocurrencies are very hard to track, which is great for tax evasion purposes, I guess. And then a lot of people have followed in Bitcoin's footsteps. So just like Bitcoin is the king of all of the cryptocurrencies, but there are a bunch of different other kinds. I guess Ethereum is the second most popular one, if you've heard of that. But the idea of Bitcoin, or cryptocurrency in general, is like everybody gets a little account, and like here's my account, and maybe I have some Bitcoins. Yeah. Really, what this account is, it doesn't have my name associated with it. It's just a big long number, like a bunch of ones and zeros, some binary thing. And that's how people know that, like, if I give them this, they know that that is where my account is. So only the people who you give your account number to know that that's yours. Or maybe they don't even know it's yours, who knows. And then other people can also have accounts. So, like, I don't know. Let's say I make a Bitcoin account for my cat, and he doesn't have as much money as me because he's a cat. He's got his own little number that is representing his Bitcoin account, and that is called a wallet, by the way. So a wallet is your account in Bitcoin land. It's just a number, and it is equivalent to just a big long, it's essentially a numerical address, like a street number address, to where your account lives, and everybody can find it. And so the goal is, like, with a lot of cryptography, RSA included, so we've talked about that, kind of what you can do in Bitcoin is you can say, you can spend your money. You can give a piece of your Bitcoin to somebody else, and the Bitcoin protocol, which we're about to talk about, makes sure that nobody knows, like, whose account this is. It's just a number. And it also makes sure, like, you lost money and that other person gained money as well. So everybody agrees on that. So you can't, like, spend your money, your virtual money twice, get super rich. There's other ways to do that, I guess. So that's Bitcoin in a nutshell. Are there any questions about that so far? Maybe we're all experts. I don't know by now. But yeah, Bitcoin exists on this network. It's on the internet, essentially. It's called a blockchain. So let's talk about that. Bitcoin is essentially a peer-to-peer network. We've talked about that for like file sharing purposes. This is like money sharing purposes. Bitcoin is a network of computers. They're all working together and they're all connected to the Bitcoin network. And so like you have your laptop can be connected to the Bitcoin network. And like there's a bunch of other servers connected as well. So here's your little laptop. And maybe that's where my account lives, but they're all connected. Like here's a big long server. Got a bunch of data. They're all connected to each other, talking to each other along this network. All right? And so that's important to have a bunch of computers on the network. We'll talk about that in a second. But like here's the setup. Everybody, all these computers are all connected to Bitcoin, whatever that means, all at once. All right? And it's powered by encryption. So like your account number, it's not just a like a random number. It is your public key. It really is about RSA. You remember all that. Your account number is your public key, and nobody can spend money in your account unless you have that private key that's associated with it, which is very hard to crack, right? So that's perfect. And so, yeah, essentially, maybe I store my account information on my little laptop here. As long as I have access to my, like here's my money, as long as I have my private key, I can spend money. That's what allows me to like sign my transactions and like feed money into the network. All right, that's the goal. So yeah, that's what the blockchain is, that's what the Bitcoin network looks like. And then this thing called the blockchain is just a big long file. That's all Bitcoin is. It's just a big long file that has recorded every single transaction that's ever been made. Like this account got this much money, then this account got this much money, back and forth, forever and ever and ever. Just the entire history of all the Bitcoins ever being spent. That's called the blockchain, all right? So everybody has a copy of that file, and they're all trying to agree on that copy. That's how we make sure that people aren't stealing each other's money, all right? So there's some very cool distributed systems concepts here that you'll have to learn about in a fancy computer science class. But everybody's storing a big, long file, and if you read the file and order it, it'll tell you exactly how much money is in each account. Question? As far as I know, I'm not really into this too much, but it's always been a roundabout way. So like you're using a website that's storing your private key for you, and somebody hacked into that website and got it that way. Stuff like that is what I've heard about. Nobody like actually cracking the key though. Yeah, good question. Has anybody heard of that? Maybe you're more into Bitcoin than I am. Yeah, that's what I've heard. So if you have it on your own computer, you don't tell anybody your private key, it's pretty safe, I would say. And so yeah, everybody has this copy of this file called the blockchain, and that's how everybody knows how much money is in each account. And so if I want to spend money, like I do this, I sign with my private key, I want to spend some of my Bitcoins. When somebody spends their Bitcoins, everybody's blockchain gets a new line at the end of it. It's like Lawton sent some of his money to this account, or this account sent this much money to this other account. They don't know that's mine, right? They're all adding this line to the bottom of their blockchain. And they're all trying to agree on that. They're like, oh yeah, Lawton does have that much money to spend. Cool. We're going to get rid of it from his account and put it in this other person's account. So everybody's agreeing on the contents of this blockchain, and we have strength in numbers. All right? That's why Bitcoin is so popular. You can't really fake money because a bunch of computers that are all connected to this network, they all have to agree. It's hard to fake that kind of agreement. All right? So that's the blockchain in general. And so you might think that if you're a bad guy, like what you would want to do is like you'd write to the blockchain saying something wrong, like my account gets 1,000 Bitcoins from a bunch of other accounts that have nothing to do with this. So you can try to do that, but the majority of the computers are going to be like, you're lying. So the goal with Bitcoin, the reason it works so well is because it's popular. So you have all these computers connected to each other on the network, and let's say like you're a malicious user, maybe you're like a malicious government or something. You have a lot of processing power, and you're able to take over this much of the Bitcoin network. As long as you don't take over half of the network, you lose. You cannot write fake data to the blockchain because everybody has to agree. There needs to be a majority of the computers on the Bitcoin network. They have to agree to allow that transaction to be added to the end of the blockchain. All right, and so unless like you have a few million supercomputers lying around, then you can't really do much. But I guess, like if the US, let's say, the US and a bunch of other allies got together and used all of our computing power, it's possible that we could take over the Bitcoin network and render it useless, like get everybody's money out. But that would take some serious computational power to do that kind of thing. And so people trust Bitcoin because this is a hard thing to make happen, right? So this majority rule is great because there's a lot of computers on the network, right? Some alternative Bitcoins, though, like some of these other pictures, they've met some horrible fates, unfortunately, because it is easier to take over half of the network when there's not a lot of computers connected. So like some smaller coins with not a lot of computers storing that blockchain, their own version of that. It's easier to take that over. But that's the idea. So you got cryptography plus majority rule. That's how Bitcoin works, more or less. Any questions about any of that? We heard these terms before, maybe? All right. The last thing, maybe we've definitely heard this term. We all heard about Bitcoin mining before. It is no longer profitable, which is pretty nice. So during the pandemic, right, you couldn't buy a graphics card because everybody was buying them up to do Bitcoin mining. But now that is no longer financially good. So what does mining mean? Let me tell you that to you. So Bitcoin, when it first started in 2009, there were no Bitcoins anywhere. None existed. There were no accounts yet, right? So the idea to make money in the Bitcoin network out of nothing, that's what mining does, all right? So as an incentive to keep your computer turned on and storing this big long file called the blockchain, the Bitcoin people were like, all right, we're going to have a lottery every few transactions. There's a little lottery that happens. It's very interesting. Every few transactions, they go together, and the first computer that wins this lottery gets some Bitcoins made out of thin air. That's how you mine Bitcoins. Like you got a little pickaxe into the virtual earth or something. So a little lottery happens, and that creates Bitcoin. That's how the first Bitcoins got made. Somebody won that lottery. So Bitcoin gets generated out of thin air and sent to one lucky person, and they have some extra Bitcoins in their account. That's how money gets printed, essentially. So here's an example of the lottery. It's hard to explain if you have not learned about cryptography before, but the idea of the Bitcoin lottery is like everybody gets sent a bunch of transactions, right? Because they're all trying to add it to the blockchain. And the idea is to come up with a special number that encrypts all of those transactions. And the Bitcoin network says that this special number, this random number that you have to generate in this special way, it has to start with this many zeros. Like you have to generate a random number in a very weird way that starts with this many zeros, and then the rest of it like has the contents of those transactions in it. That's essentially the game that everybody gets to start playing at once in the Bitcoin network. And then the first person to come up with this number that works for those transactions, the secret number, gets the Bitcoin. All right? And so this is a computationally hard problem to solve. And so it takes a lot of energy. The Bitcoin network takes a whole bunch of energy. But that's the game. And so sometimes, like when there's a lot of computers on the network, it's like you have to have a bunch of zeros at the start because that's a harder number to generate, apparently. And so yeah, that's how Bitcoins get made, and it is programmed into the Bitcoin network that eventually, like at the beginning of time, a lot of Bitcoins were given out per transaction, but slowly but surely, this number is going to get smaller and smaller over time. The amount of Bitcoins that you can mine gets lower and lower, and one day it's programmed to run out. You can't make any more Bitcoins with mining. That's the idea. So that's what mining is. It's just like solving a weird math problem very quickly with your computer, and that's how you generate Bitcoins. And if you can do that fast enough, you get free money. And so it was economically viable to do that back during the pandemic. People just bought a lot of GPUs and started crunching numbers trying to solve these math problems that the Bitcoin network was throwing at them. And so that made them money. But nowadays it's a bit harder, and so not a lot of people are buying up all the graphics cards, which is a good thing for us who build our own computers. Yeah, so that's mining. Any questions about that? Fun little idea. And so I I guess the goal of all of these things that I tell you about, this is kind of an ethical problem, I would say, cryptocurrency. Let's talk about it. Also, I like to keep track every semester that I teach this class. I keep track of the current price of Bitcoin, and so like the first semester I taught the class, it was that. Then the next semester it jumped up to that. So we all should have bought Bitcoin in between those 2 semesters. And then it went up higher, got lower, went down a whole lot, and then this is what it's sitting at right now, 35-ish thousand last weekend. That's when I stole that image. But wow, it's fluctuating, that's for sure. And we should talk about, like, well, is this an okay thing to do? For the first people who were using Bitcoins were the people who didn't want their name associated with an account, because that's one thing that Bitcoin can do for you. So the first uses of Bitcoin were on like black markets to buy drugs or to buy like weapons. That's a thing. And then it's of course hard for governments to track who owns what Bitcoin and how they're spending it. So it's very easy to launder money with it, etc., etc. And then also, like, if you're buying Bitcoin, like, maybe this is your fault, but there is no guarantee about how much money you're going to make from your Bitcoin if you hold on to it for a while. Who knows if the price is going to go up or go down, all right? Since no governments have any faith in this stuff because they don't like it, because they can't tax you based on it. So let's ask our boys. It's been a while. What would Kant say? Would he be pro cryptocurrency? I think Kant would say, yeah, he likes Bitcoin because Kant is for individual rights, yeah, and he thinks that like people will, of course, want to pay taxes. That's just what they should be doing. Everybody should be paying taxes, even on their cryptocurrency. So Kant would be all for a new option for money. But then, if you ask a utilitarian, what would they say? You have to weigh your options, right? What gives you the most utility? I guess if you're a government, you probably hate cryptocurrency. So, like, if you're a government, you're making less money in taxes because people aren't like claiming that they made bitcoins. It's easier to fund illicit things, buy drugs and stuff. And then also, I barely touched on this, but like a bunch of computers are solving math problems very fast. They're generating a lot of heat and they're wasting a lot of energy doing that. So last I heard, the energy consumption of the Bitcoin network is equivalent to the energy consumption of Argentina. Okay, so there's a huge environmental cost just to have Bitcoin in the world. So that's a bit of a problem. That might be a big con for us. But then you got to track the pros as well. So I guess a good thing about Bitcoin, right, about cryptocurrency, is that it's great for individual freedoms, so that you're not being tracked when you spend your money, and that's pretty nice to have privacy like that. So yeah, any thoughts about any of that? Questions, comments? Because I have a silly little game that I like to play with my students every semester. We're going to pretend to be computers on the Bitcoin network right now, if you will humor me with this. So here's a new cryptocurrency hot off the market. It's called Litecoin, and it has my cat as the figurehead. So one Litecoin is not worth a lot of money right now, but maybe you can drive the price up. And here's how you mine a Litecoin, all right? You're going to solve a math problem the fastest. So I'm going to put some questions up on these slides, and the first person to come up to the board, like, here's a marker for you. The first person to write the correct answer next to the question gets a Litecoin. I'm about to create some for you, okay? So, are you ready? Ready, set, go. Here are your 3 questions. They have to be exact. The first person to write the correct answer on the board gets a Litecoin, which I'm about to mine for you right now onto these napkins. What? It's the first person who writes the answer on the board. So you gotta come up and get one of these markers. And I don't care to how many decimal places you get the answer right, as long as it's correct. But this is what's happening inside of the computers on the Bitcoin network. Essentially, they're given a math problem. And they're forced to solve it. And that's how money gets made. This is a good example of what happens inside of a computer on the Bitcoin network. Are we all too shy or just too grown up to do this? It's okay. But I'll compute the answers right now, just so I can compare. Celsius. Nice. Perfect. I'll be checking these answers right now. Which one was year Celsius, but year Fahrenheit? Very nice. Takers for question 2. Thank you for playing. Alright, I don't want to spend the rest of time on this, so let us check our answers. No, I'll keep the question 2 Litcoin then if we're too scared to try. But yeah, let's take a look. So what is 0.42 times the speed of light in meters per second? Yeah? Yeah, try and write it. Go for it. And then I'll calculate the weather one on my other computer. Python 68 plus 4. Alright, let's check our answers. So 0.42 times the speed of light in meters per second. This is apparently what I calculated, and I assume that is correct. Yeah, 125, that's what it starts with. So perfect. So is that where you want or where you want? Yeah. Number 2. Oh, you can't even see it. Atomic mass of carbon plus atomic mass of sulfur. Very nice. 385-ish. Good job. Exchange that for money, maybe. From somebody else in the class. And then today's Fresno's max temperature in Celsius is apparently, according to Google, 24. And then the max for San Francisco in Fahrenheit is 68 is what I saw. But that's close enough. Congratulations. So that's pretty much what computers are doing, and that's how they. That's how money gets made on a cryptocurrency network. I hope that you enjoyed that. Forgive me as I fix this chair. Weird. Just put this over here. Yeah. Any questions about any of that? I hope that was fun. So good job. And I think that's all I want to say about cryptocurrency. So if we are good, let's move to the next set of slides that I want to talk about. So this is a great example of a field that exists across computer science and other things. It's called game theory. We've heard of that before. It's a fun, exciting one. And so let's talk about it. A lot of cool concepts here. We're going to just start it today. All right. So here is game theory. It's a very generic idea. It's going to be really cool. All right. So let's say, because this is Fresno, let's say that for our running example, for our first example, there are two people who want to sell corn. All right. I'll prove to you that this is a game first of all, and then we're gonna see what price that these people, these corn farmers, should sell their goods at. All right. So let's think about this. Let's have a thought experiment. Here's like corn, the first farmer's corn stand. This is farmer A. They're selling corn. And then here's farmer B. They've got their own corn stand. All right, farmer A, farmer B. Here's the game, right? It really is a game in the game theoretic sense. If one farmer sells their corn really, really expensive, $50 per ear of corn, and then the other farmer sells their corn for $5 per ear or something, I don't know, then everybody's going to buy corn B, right? Because corn is corn, especially if they're both made in Fresno or something. So everybody's going to go buy the cheap one, right? I think that's pretty obvious. Game theory, the idea of game theory, and we're going to get into the exact definition, but it will tell us why, first of all, selling corn is a game, and then also it will tell us why the prices are going to be driven down from that expensive producer. Because if this guy wants to stay in business, they are producing the same corn, they're selling it for $50, then they are going to bring it down to $5 if they want to make a living. Okay, so this is a good example of like gas stations do this. You see one person sets their price low, everybody else has to follow because nobody's going to go to the other gas station. Right? That's what's going on there. So there's going to be an equilibrium. People are going to agree on the price for corn. That is where we're going. All right, that's game theory in a nutshell. Unless you do something illegal, like the two sellers, they get together and they're like, we're the only two corn producers in Fresno. We're both going to sell our corn for $50 in here. Unless you do that, and there's reasons that's illegal. Unless you do that, then game theory does not apply. Okay. So yeah, that's my first example, and game theory will tell us why this works. So the word game is definitely an overloaded term in game theory, but it's a very popular field, and it has a lot to do with a bunch of different interlinking concepts. So game theory was invented by a man named John Nash. He had a movie made about his life. It's a fun idea. But yeah, game theory is all about finding equilibriums to problems. All right. So let's define games, because it might seem that selling corn doesn't seem to be a game to you, right? So a game, as far as game theory is concerned, is just a strategic interaction between individuals and situations. So it's very vague. So you can see how like playing a board game as well as selling corn is a game to game theorists. And so interaction between individuals, so individual people playing this game in situations. They're getting into trouble or something. So it can handle a bunch of different concepts that you can throw at it. A lot of things are games, like, I don't know, you doing work in this class is technically a game to game theory. Right? So there are two main kinds of games. A game can be cooperative or non-cooperative. A cooperative game is when people end up being better off. They do better when they work together. All right. So like our society is a cooperative game because we're all specializing in our own different things. We're not like making all of our food for just ourselves, right? We're taking advantage of the corn farmers as we are computer scientists and teachers. Okay. So cooperative games are when people are better off working together, and it's always best to form like a group or an alliance to get together. We'll always do the best that way. It's not good to work alone in a cooperative game. And then a non-cooperative game is kind of the opposite. It's not just that it hurts you to form groups and get into alliances with other players, but in fact, players cannot form alliances. It doesn't work out very well. All right. So that's a non-cooperative game when it's best to not form an alliance, or maybe it's impossible. And in certain kinds of games, if you ever end up working with somebody in a non-cooperative game, it's because there's like a sense of threatening. You've been threatened by some other person. So it's always better to work alone, usually in a non-cooperative game. It doesn't make sense to ever get together unless something weird has happened. So that's game theory in a nutshell. And then like here's their slogans. So cooperative game theory, it's when you're worrying about fairness. That's usually the problem that you're solving. How can I play this game the most fairly? And then a non-cooperative game, and the theory behind it is all about like how to win. All right. So yeah, let's talk about game theory in a nutshell. I have a good example, and that'll take us out of here. But game theory is used in a whole bunch of different fields, so it's a great thing to talk about after our previous slides. It's used in econ, like you can model the way that countries spend their money with game theory. Political science, like how governments work and prioritize different things. Biology, philosophy, and just even if you're a corn farmer. So there's a lot of different use cases for game theory, and it's been pretty popular recently. So people end up like people who want something. People are spending lots and lots of money to write programs. So that's where the computer science comes in. To write programs to solve for the optimal strategy to play whatever game you're trying to play. Like I'm trying to run my business. That's a game essentially to a game theorist. So yeah, if you write a good enough program to solve for how to run your business correctly, you're essentially using game theory deep down sometimes. So yeah, that's a fun idea. And so I'd like to teach you, I just have one longer example for the rest of this. I want to teach you about a good example of a non-cooperative game where you can't really form alliances with anybody else. You got to work alone. So it's called the prisoner's dilemma. Have any of us heard of that before? Yeah, it's a popular concept to teach game theory, and it's got some cool videos on YouTube. I linked one of them. Feel free to watch them. But here's the setup if you've never heard of it before. It's a really good example of a non-cooperative game with a really weird outcome that doesn't make sense until we learn some game theory. So here's the idea. You've got two prisoners accused of committing a crime. They're held in two separate cells. They're placed into two separate interrogation rooms. And here they're given these options. They both get to see these options as they're placed into their separate interrogation rooms. They're like, all right, you prisoner, if it's all from the perspective of each of them. So here are the four outcomes that are possible from either you confessing or you not confessing, because they're both being interrogated separately. So the first outcome is if prisoner A confesses to the crime, saying that they did it, but prisoner B does not confess to the crime, they were caught together, right? So here's what would happen in that case. If prisoner A confesses but prisoner B does not, then prisoner A gets to walk away free to go, but prisoner B is going to get 10 years in prison because they did not also confess, all right? So they were lying, apparently. And outcome two, all right, if prisoner A doesn't confess but prisoner B does, it's the flip-flop of that. Then prisoner B is walking away free, and then prisoner A is getting sent to prison for 10 years. And then here are your other two outcomes. If you both confess, you're going to both get 5 years, all right? But the fourth outcome, if neither of you confess, you can both walk away because it's just, I don't know, maybe all of the evidence they have is circumstantial. They can't really pin it down. And so if nobody confesses, they have nothing to go on, and so they'll both walk away for free. And so they all know these outcomes. Both prisoners, they get these options put in front of them. They both know that that is the idea. And the question is, and game theory is going to tell us something interesting based on this, what should these prisoners do? How should they work? Right? What is the optimal outcome? Right? So as you think about, like, what would you do if you were prisoners? Let me draw the grid of the options. So here's from the perspective of prisoner A, and here's from the perspective of prisoner B on this axis. So either, like, what are your options for prisoner A? Either prisoner A can confess or not confess, right? So there's two axes here, two lines. So I'll say C for confesses and NC for does not confess, not confess. So prisoner A can confess or not confess, and same with prisoner B. They could also confess or not confess. And then let's write down what happens in each of these outcomes. So if they both confess, right, we're in that square, then prisoner A gets 5 years and prisoner B gets 5 years. You got to stay in there, but not for 10 at least. If prisoner A does not confess, but prisoner B does confess, then we are in option 2, and that's when, well, prisoner A apparently was lying or should have confessed, right? If prisoner B confessed but A did not, B gets to walk free, but A spends 10 years in prison. And then the other way is the flip-flop of that. If prisoner B does not confess, but prisoner A does, then prisoner A gets to walk away for free. And then prisoner B spends 10 years in jail, sadly. And then if neither of them confess, that's outcome 4, they both get 0 years in prison. They can walk away. Walk away free. They can go home. So that's your grid, and it might seem, right, that this is the right option. Yeah, that's the right way to play the game. Both of you keep your mouths shut, and you'll all walk away for free. The surprising thing is that this is not the optimal outcome of this game, all right, because it's non-cooperative. So let me tell that to you. Let me spend a slide saying that to you, all right? So what we're about to do is find the Nash equilibrium for this game. It's named after this guy who invented game theory, John Nash. So it's going to tell us which solution to the prisoner's dilemma problem is the optimal one, and it's going to be non-obvious. It's going to be a little paradoxical even, why that is the optimal solution, but it should make sense by the time I'm done explaining, I think. But a Nash equilibrium is what we're setting out to find. So let's just define that, explain it. So the definition of a Nash equilibrium is a way to play the game. So a set of strategies, one for each player, that has the property that, so this is where you have to pay a little bit of attention, it has the property that each player's choice is the best response to the choices of the other players. Because it's non-cooperative, they can't form alliances, you have no guarantee over what the other person is doing. Your choice better be the best response to any other possibility of whatever your other players could have done. So prisoner A has no clue what prisoner B is going to say, and vice versa, right? So it's got to be the best response to any option because it's up in the air. They have no control over what the other players are doing in this game, okay? And so the key idea for our prisoner's dilemma problem is that prisoner A has no clue what prisoner B is going to do under pressure, right? And so the Nash equilibrium is going to tell us that prisoner A should probably play it safe if they want the best outcome, all right? The Nash equilibrium is essentially the mathematical way of specifying what it means to play a game safely, okay? So another competing idea of what a Nash equilibrium is like a law that nobody wants to break. This is something that I found on the internet. So like a Nash equilibrium is a law that nobody wants to break, even when there is no punishment for breaking it, right? So here's a good example of like a Nash equilibrium in real life. Stoplights, right? We all obey stoplights, don't we? We all stop at a red light, we go when it's green. But for the most part, we'd get away, right? If we just ran every red light all day long, we'd mostly get away, right? There's hardly ever a cop nearby. So we would be fine. Why don't we always run a red light, though? What's the reasoning? You don't want to take it, but more importantly, yeah, you don't want to die. Because if you're going to go when it's red, other people are trying to go when it's green, it's not going to end well for you, right? So it's essentially a self-enforcing law is what a Nash equilibrium is. It's because we all would like to get home tonight, we're all going to obey the stoplights, even when we know there's probably not a cop there. We could run it if we wanted to. That's what it means to play this game optimally. All right? So, yeah, for the prisoners, I'm going to draw a little thing on the next slide, but the goal to compute the Nash equilibrium is to figure out, like, if I'm prisoner A, I've got no clue what prisoner B is going to do. I'm going to average together like the worst case scenarios. All right, so let me draw that. Actually, can I just copy and paste this? That would be nice. Oops. Almost. Try again. All right, so here's our little grid, and let's consider it from prisoner A's point of view, I think, because it's symmetric for prisoner B. So what we're going to do is we're going to calculate the average sentence in each outcome. All right. So I'm gonna take it from prisoner A's perspective. It's symmetric. You could do it from prisoner B's perspective, but we want to calculate the average outcome in each case. Like prisoner A could confess or not confess, and we have no clue what prisoner B is going to do. So if prisoner A confesses, like here is prisoner A's two options, right? The two outcomes. That's all prisoner A has control over, whether they confess or whether they don't confess. They have no control over what prisoner B does. They're not to be trusted. And so if prisoner A does not confess, they're in one of these two. So if prisoner A confesses, they're in one of these two outcomes. If prisoner A does not confess, they're in one of those two outcomes, right? And so the way to generate a Nash equilibrium is to calculate averages. So prisoner A, if prisoner A confesses, and if they don't confess, let's compute a number. So if they confess, and if they don't confess, and what we want to do is we want to calculate the average time spent in jail over every possibility. We don't know what's going to happen with prisoner B. And this will be non-obvious. It's going to be very interesting. Average time spent in jail. So if prisoner A confesses, what's the average time that they're going to spend in jail? Because if they confess, we know we're in one of these two outcomes. We have no control over what prisoner B does. So either prisoner A is going to get 5 years in prison or 0 years in prison if they confess. We're not sure what prisoner B is going to do. It's one or the other. And so let's just take the average because we have no control. It's 5 plus 0 over 2. Yeah? And so that's equal to 2.5 years on average in prison if they confess. And then if prisoner A does not confess, we're in one of these two options, right? Either they're spending 10 years in prison or 0. They have no control over which outcome because prisoner B is not to be trusted. It's a non-cooperative game. So what's the average time that prisoner A will spend in jail there? 10 plus 0 over 2 this time. That's 5 years. So do you see how it is better for prisoner A to confess? On average, they're spending less time in jail. That's the Nash equilibrium. Confess. And this is the same if you do it from prisoner B's perspective. So actually, in the average case, it always makes more sense to confess. And so this is going to be the case. This is going to be what they both gravitate towards. They're both going to confess. Both prisoners should confess. It's best for them. Okay? And that might seem weird and paradoxical to you, right? Because if they just both kept their mouth shut, they would walk away for free. But game theory tells us why they're both going to confess. Because this outcome is going to lead to, on average, it's always better to confess for each of them. And so they're going to gravitate towards that outcome. All right? Because in either case, regardless of what the other person does, they're spending less time in jail on average. All right? So, yeah, even though you might think this is the right answer, what they should both do, because it's a non-cooperative game, they're going to end up both confessing, and that's the best thing for them, in fact. Any questions about that? That's a fun idea, I think. That's a Nash equilibrium. That's a solution to the prisoner's dilemma problem. Fun little idea, I think. And so this is like, this is not really computational yet, but it's a great segue into like how you can use computer science to do all this stuff, to solve these problems for you. Okay? So if we're good there, I think that's where I want to stop today with the lecture. Between slides, that's for sure. But I'd like to give you your next essay, because I believe you have one due this week. So this one is going to be due the last week of classes. This is your last essay. We finally made it. The last essay in this class. Let's finish strong. So 1,000 words. Got to get those word counts back to what we're required to have. Sorry. But this one should at least be fun to write, all right? Because I'd like to just let you write whatever you'd like. So please build your own essay for your final essay in this class. Here's your requirements. Just write about some topic related to computing, technology, or like the internet that interests you, so it's easy to write about. And then also, this is the major key, right? It has some social or ethical implications so that there's some arguments you can analyze. That's key. So the only thing you can't write about is anything similar to the previous essays, because that would be a little too easy, right? So pick some topic that we haven't really touched on much in this class that is like near and dear to your heart and has some people that are on the other side of it, so you can analyze it, social and ethical implications, and then just go with it. So I'd like you to do the following. Just like there's an issue that you found, right, hopefully, because it has social and ethical implications. Pick it apart. Talk about both sides, talk about the assumptions that the sides are using for this topic, point out any fallacies that are involved with the topic and that are common in arguments about it, talk about what our boys might think about it, if it's an ethical problem, etc., etc. So do whatever you'd like, as long as you're following this idea, right? As long as it's relevant and has these implications. Any questions about those requirements? Because those are the main ones. All right, so I want, yes, question? It must be related to one of those topics. Not all of them, but one of them. So something, it's a computer science class, so something similar to something about computer science. Does that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, so one of those kinds of topics. And then finish strong, so 1,000-word essay, please, on this. And this should be kind of a research paper, so I want to see some works cited. So please cite 4 works in this essay at least. And I think that is all. Any questions about any of that? Because those are your requirements. All right. And make sure when you're citing things, you can't just make a works cited page and say that you use things. I've seen this in some essays. Just make sure like you have a citation in the text. Like I got this stuff from this paper. That's important. That's what it means to cite stuff. Okay. I think that's it. So this will be due week 17, last week classes. And the rest of the time is yours to brainstorm or work on other things.